It was a calm night in Havana Harbor until a massive explosion shattered the silence. The USS Maine, a symbol of American power, was suddenly torn apart in a ball of fire. Before the smoke had even cleared, the finger of blame was pointed directly at Spain. The tragic loss of 260 American sailors ignited a firestorm of public outrage. Across the United States, citizens gathered in the streets demanding retribution. The peace that had existed was rapidly crumbling, replaced by a thirsty desire for war and national vengeance.
But this conflict didn't start with a ship. For decades, the Cuban people had been fighting a brutal and bloody war for independence against their colonial masters, the Spanish Empire.
Spain sent General Weyler, known as the Butcher, to crush the rebellion. He herded civilians into disease-ridden camps, causing thousands of deaths and horrifying the watching world. Stories of starvation and cruelty filtered back to America. The suffering of the Cuban people tugged at the heartstrings of the public, creating a moral crusade to intervene.
Newspaper moguls Hearst and Pulitzer saw this tragedy as an opportunity. They engaged in yellow journalism, sensationalizing stories and printing exaggerations to sell millions of papers and fuel the war.
Their newspapers painted Spain as an inhuman monster. Truth became secondary to emotion, manipulating public opinion until the entire nation was screaming for blood and military intervention.
President William McKinley was a veteran of the Civil War and knew the horrors of battle. He desperately tried to maintain peace and diplomacy, resisting the drumbeat of war.
However, a leaked letter from the Spanish ambassador insulted McKinley, calling him weak. This insult to the president was the final straw for many, destroying diplomatic bridges. To protect American interests and citizens, McKinley had sent the USS Maine to Havana. It was meant to be a show of force, but it became the spark that lit the fuse. When the ship exploded, chaos reigned. Sailors were thrown into the harbor, struggling to survive amidst the wreckage. The tragedy was visceral, immediate, and impossible for America to ignore. "Remember the Maine, to hell with Spain," became the rallying cry of the nation. It was shouted at rallies, printed on buttons, and whispered in the halls of Congress. Congress authorized the president to use force. An ultimatum was sent to Spain to withdraw from Cuba. Spain severed diplomatic relations, and the path to war was now irreversible. In April 1898, war was officially declared. It was to be the first major overseas conflict for a reunited United States since the end of the Civil War. To prove their intentions were noble, the U.S. passed the Teller Amendment. It promised that the United States would not annex Cuba, but leave control of the island to its people. While eyes were on Cuba, the first blow would actually fall on the other side of the world. The Spanish colony of the Philippines was a key strategic target. Commodore George Dewey, stationed in Hong Kong, received orders to attack. He prepared his squadron and steamed toward Manila Bay, ready to strike the aging Spanish Pacific Fleet. On May 1st, Dewey's modern steel ships entered Manila Bay. At dawn, he gave the famous command, "You may fire when you are ready, Gridley," initiating the battle. The battle was a massacre. The modern American guns decimated the Spanish fleet. By noon, the Spanish naval power in the Pacific was completely destroyed, with minimal American casualties. News of the victory electrified the United States. Dewey became an instant national hero, proving that America had become a formidable naval power on the global stage. On land, Filipino leader Emilio Aguinaldo, who had been fighting for independence, allied with the Americans. He believed the U.S. had come to liberate his people from Spanish rule. Back in the Atlantic, the U.S. Army was mobilizing for Cuba. They were ill-prepared, equipped with heavy wool uniforms suited for winter, not the sweltering heat of the Caribbean tropics. Logistics were a disaster. Soldiers faced shortages of medical supplies and were fed low-quality canned meat, later scandalously called embalmed beef, which sickened many troops before they even fought. Despite the chaos, American troops landed at Daiquiri and Siboney in June. The invasion had begun. They were joined by ragged but fierce Cuban rebels, eager to drive out the Spanish. The terrain was difficult. Thick jungle, intense heat,
and tropical diseases proved to be enemies just as dangerous as the Spanish soldiers waiting in their fortified positions.
Among the invading force was a unique volunteer cavalry regiment known as the Rough Riders. It was a motley mix of Ivy League athletes, rugged cowboys, and Western frontiersmen.
Leading them was Theodore Roosevelt, who had resigned as Assistant Secretary of the Navy to fight. He was eager for glory and deeply believed in the strenuous life of warfare.
The first significant land skirmish occurred at Las Guasimas. The Americans pushed back the Spanish forces, clearing the path toward the strategic city of Santiago. The army used a hydrogen balloon to spot enemy positions. While it provided intelligence, it also acted as a giant target, drawing heavy Spanish fire onto the troops gathered below. On July 1st, a fierce battle erupted at El Caney. American forces struggled to take a fortified Spanish position. It took all day and heavy casualties to finally secure the village. Simultaneously, the main assault began on the San Juan Heights. This series of hills blocked the way to Santiago and was heavily defended by entrenched Spanish soldiers. Teddy Roosevelt famously led the charge up Kettle Hill. With only a pistol and his charisma, he urged his men forward into a hail of Mauser bullets to capture the ridge. Often overlooked, the African-American Buffalo soldiers of the 9th and 10th Cavalry played a critical role. They fought bravely alongside the Rough Riders, saving the day at crucial moments. By the end of the day, the Americans controlled the heights looking down on Santiago. The cost was high, with hundreds dead or wounded, but the Spanish line was broken. With the heights captured, the Spanish Caribbean squadron trapped in Santiago Harbor was doomed. They could not stay, and leaving meant facing the waiting American naval blockade. Admiral Cervera knew his fleet was outgunned. However, honor and orders from Madrid compelled him to attempt a breakout rather than surrender his ships without a fight. On July 3rd, the Spanish ships made a desperate dash for the open sea. The American fleet was waiting. Giant battleships opened fire, turning the sea into a boiling cauldron. One by one, the Spanish ships were set ablaze and driven ashore. It was a complete annihilation of Spanish naval power in the Caribbean, sealing the fate of the war. Cut off from support and supplies, the Spanish garrison in Santiago surrendered shortly after. The brief but intense fighting in Cuba was effectively over, ending centuries of Spanish rule. American General Nelson Miles then led an invasion of Puerto Rico. The campaign met little resistance compared to Cuba, as many locals welcomed the arrival of the U.S. forces. The war officially ended with the Treaty of Paris in December 1898. Spain ceded Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States and relinquished sovereignty over Cuba. The United States had transformed from a regional republic into a global empire. It now possessed overseas territories and was a major player on the international geopolitical stage. However, the story had a dark turn. The Filipinos, expecting independence, felt betrayed when the U.S. took control. This sparked a much longer and bloodier war, the Philippine-American War. The Splendid Little War, as it was called, lasted only a few months, but changed the world map forever. It marked the dawn of the American century and modern interventionism. The legacy of 1898 echoes today. It established the precedents for American military power abroad and left complex relationships with Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines that persist to this day. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please hit the like button and subscribe for more documentaries. Let us know in the comments what historical event we should cover next.